The planet was harsh. Its barren landscape stretched for miles, with little to offer in terms of life or hope. A small spaceship lay in the dirt, half buried by the weight of its crash. Its metal hull was twisted, charred from the explosion. Inside, the silence was heavy, but a faint breath could be heard. Zira, an alien girl, had survived the crash. She lay in the wreckage, her body bruised and bleeding. The merciless invaders had attacked her ship without warning, shooting it down from the sky. Zira had fought back, but her strength had not been enough. She had been left behind, abandoned to die alone on a planet where nothing but dust and danger lived. Her eyes fluttered open. Pain shot through her head, making her vision blur. Could barely move, her limbs aching from the violent crash. The blood on her skin dried in the heat, and she gasped for breath. She tried to focus, but the world around her spun. She was alone. Zira's species had always been strong, known for their ability to survive the harshest conditions, but this was different. She had never been left to die like this. Been her lifeline, and now it was nothing more than a pile of twisted metal. The invaders had taken everything from her, but Zira was alive. The girl's breath slowed, and her senses sharpened. Despite the pain, her mind remained clear. Knew she had to move. She had to survive. She reached out, trying to pull herself from the wreckage. Her hands were weak, but she gritted her teeth, determined not to give in. After what felt like hours, Zira managed to pull herself to her feet. Her body was unsteady, her legs trembling. She stumbled forward, each step taking every ounce of strength. She had left. The sun burned overhead, its heat only adding to her suffering. She was so weak, but she couldn't stop. There was nowhere else to go. Just as she took another step, a shadow moved across her path. For a moment, Zira froze, her heart racing. She wasn't alone. Invaders? No, they had left her for dead. She looked around frantically, but the landscape was empty. And then she saw him. A human. A man standing just a few feet away, staring at her. His face was rough, his clothes torn from his journey across the desolate planet. But there was something in his eyes, a softness, a concern that Zira hadn't seen in anyone since her ship was attacked. She tried to speak, but her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. Her throat was dry, her body aching. She had no strength left to defend herself, but somehow the human didn't seem dangerous. He stepped forward, cautiously, his hand outstretched. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice calm and steady. It was clear he had no idea who she was or what she had been through. But there was something about his tone, something that made Zira trust him. She didn't know why, but she did. Zira's head spun again. She staggered, barely managing to stay upright. The human's hand caught her arm before she could fall. He helped her steady herself, his grip surprisingly strong. What happened to you?" he asked, his eyes scanning her injuries. Zira couldn't answer. The words felt like they were stuck in her throat. She just needed water. "Let me help," the man said softly. He didn't wait for her response. He pulled a small metal flask from his belt and held it to her lips. Zira hesitated, but the thirst in her throat was too great. She took a small sip, and the cool water soothed her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man nodded, his expression unreadable. "You're welcome," he said. "My name's Jace. What's yours?" Zira opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of this strange turn of events. A human had found her, a wounded alien on a planet far from her own. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, but something inside her urged her to take a chance. There was no one else. "Zira," she finally whispered, her voice still shaky. "Zira," Jace repeated softly, his eyes searching her face. "You're lucky I found you." Zira nodded slowly, though she wasn't sure if luck had anything to do with it. The pain was too much, and her body was screaming for rest. But she couldn't relax, not yet. She couldn't let her guard down, not when she was so vulnerable. Invaders would be looking for her, and she had no way of knowing if Jace was friend or foe. Jace seemed to understand her hesitation. He gave her a reassuring smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're safe now. I'll get you out of here. We need to find shelter before nightfall." Zero wanted to protest, but her strength was quickly fading. She nodded weakly, trusting that Jace would keep his promise. As he helped her stand, she could feel the weight of the situation pressing on her. The invaders were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until she was dead. For the first time in what felt like forever, Zero felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't completely alone. Zero's body felt like it was made of lead. Every movement brought waves of pain, and she struggled to keep her eyes open. But Jace, the human who had found her, was insistent. He led her to a small, cave-like shelter, hidden from the open plains. It wasn't much, just some rocks and a few sparse patches of grass. But it was enough to keep her out of sight for now. Jace settled her onto a patch of dry grass near a small fire he had made. The warmth of the fire made her feel a little better, but it also reminded her of how cold and empty the world had become. Her ship had been her home, and now it was nothing but wreckage on a hostile planet. "You're safe here, Jace," said his voice gentle. "I'll get some food for you." Zero nodded weakly, her mind still clouded with confusion. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She had to stay focused, stay alert. Her enemies were out there somewhere, and they would never stop looking for her. But for now, there was nothing she could do but wait. Jace returned a few minutes later, with some kind of dried meat and a small bundle of leaves. He handed them to her with a careful look. "It's not much, but it'll help." Zero took the food gratefully, but she couldn't bring herself to eat much. She was too weak. Still, she knew she had to try. She ate a little bit. The taste. Strange on her tongue, but it was better than nothing. "Thank you," Zero managed to say, her voice still hoarse. Jace smiled, though his expression remained serious. "No need to thank me. You need to get better. We'll figure this out together." Zero didn't know how to respond to that. She wasn't used to kindness, especially not from humans. In her world, kindness was a rare gift, often given to those who had earned it. But Jace didn't seem to expect anything in return. It made her uneasy, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she focused on her surroundings. The shelter was small, but it felt safe, at least for now. "You're not from here, are you?" Jace asked, breaking the silence. Zero shook her head. She wanted to explain, to tell him everything, but it was too much. She didn't know where to begin. She didn't know if she could trust him with her story. There were too many dangers, too many unknowns. Her enemies were relentless, and they would never stop hunting her until she was caught. "Where did you come from?" Jace pressed gently. "You're not like any alien I've ever seen." Zero's heart tightened at the question. She had seen humans before, from a distance, but never up close. She had never interacted with them. Humans were strange sometimes. Helpful, sometimes dangerous. She didn't know what Jace's intentions were, but she couldn't afford to trust him completely. "Not yet. I'm from a planet far away," she said quietly, careful not to reveal too much. "My ship was attacked, and I was the only one who survived." Jace nodded, though he looked like he wanted to ask more questions. But he seemed to sense that Zero wasn't ready to talk, so he held back. Instead, he busied himself with checking the fire, adding more fuel to keep it going. "Ooh!" The crackling sound of the fire filled the silence between them. Zero felt the weight of exhaustion, pulling at her again. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this drained. She had been through so much, in such a short time, being attacked, losing her home, being left to die. But somehow Jace's presence made things feel less lonely.
Ow.
There was something about him that calmed her, even though she knew she couldn't. Let her guard down. As the night wore on, Zero could feel her body beginning to heal. The pain was still there, but it was dulling, fading into a manageable ache. Jace noticed her discomfort and gave her more water. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her going. She looked at him again, really looking at him for the first time. His eyes were kind, but there was something in them that hinted at a deeper, harder life, one filled with struggles she couldn't imagine. He wasn't a hero or a soldier. He was just a man trying to survive, just like she was. Yet he was helping her without expecting anything in return. It was more than Zero could comprehend. "Why are you helping me?" She asked softly, the question slipping from her lips before she could stop it. Jace paused, looking at her in silence for a moment. Then, with a small shrug, he answered, I don't know. I couldn't leave you out there. You were hurt and you needed help. I'm not much of a fighter or anything, but I can do this. I know what it's like to be alone. Zero was quiet for a long time. She wasn't sure what to think of his words. Could a human truly understand loneliness the way she did? Could he grasp what it meant to be alone in a galaxy full of enemies? I've never been alone like this before, she said softly, almost to herself. I don't know who to trust. Jace didn't answer right away. He just sat beside her, letting the silence speak for itself. Then, finally he said, You don't have to trust me. But if you need help, I'll be here. Zero looked at him, searching his face for any sign of trickery. There was none. He seemed genuine, though she couldn't figure out why. What did he want from her? But in her heart, a small spark of hope ignited. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone after all. As the fire flickered and the night deepened, Zero allowed herself to rest, her mind still racing with questions. But for the first time in days, she felt a little safer. Maybe the future wasn't as hopeless as she had once thought, and there was still a chance. The days seemed to blend together as Zero and Jace stayed hidden in the shelter. Though the fire flickered warmly, the fear of being discovered never left Zero. Every time the wind howled outside or a distant noise echoed through the empty plains, she tensed. The invaders were out there somewhere. It tracked her before, and they would come for her again. Zero tried to push these thoughts aside. For the first time in days, she had a sense of calm. Jace's shelter, small as it was, felt like a small island of safety in a sea of danger. Still, she couldn't forget why she was here, why she had to keep moving. She had to find a way off this planet before they found her. Jace, though, seemed to notice her unease. He had been kind and patient, but he too was growing restless. Keep looking over your shoulder, he said one evening as they sat by the fire. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Zero shook her head slowly. It's not you I'm worried about, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jace frowned, confused. Then what is it? What's out there? Zero hesitated, her gaze distant. The invaders. They attacked my ship. They know I survived. They won't stop until they find me. Jace didn't speak for a long moment. He looked down at the fire, his face thoughtful. If they're coming for you, we have to leave, he said at last. Staying here is dangerous. Zira nodded slowly, grateful for his understanding, but she knew it wasn't that simple. Her ship was destroyed, and the invaders had a powerful army. Even if they escaped, they couldn't outrun them forever. Still, there was no other choice. Staying put would only give the enemy more time to catch up. We'll need supplies, Zero said, looking around the shelter. And I need to repair a ship. We can't escape on foot. Jace nodded. I know a place nearby, a small outpost. It's not much, but they might have what we need to fix your ship. We can find spare parts there. Zira's heart lifted, little at the thought of leaving this place behind. The outpost was far, but it was their best chance. When do we leave? She asked, standing up. As soon as you're ready, Jace answered, standing too. We'll move fast and quiet. We can't afford to be seen. Zero looked at him, her eyes searching his face. He was serious. This was no longer just about survival. They were going to fight back. The next morning, they set out at first light. The journey was harder than Zira had expected. Her body, though, healing still felt weak, and she had to push herself to keep going. Jace moved quickly, making sure to keep to the shadows, avoiding open areas where they could be spotted. His movements were calm and purposeful, and Zero couldn't help but admire his determination. As they walked, Zira thought about how much Jace had already done for her. He had saved her life, taken care of her, and now he was risking everything to help her escape. She had known humans were capable of kindness, but she had never experienced it this deeply before. It made her feel a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. She hadn't realized how much she needed it. They reached the outpost late in the afternoon. It was small, just a few old buildings and a storage shed tucked away in the rocky hills. The place looked abandoned, but Zira knew it was still used by travelers looking for supplies. Jace led her inside one of the buildings, and Zira's eyes scanned the room. There were crates, old parts, and tools scattered about, all covered in dust. "This place should have what we need," Jace said, walking to a crate in the corner. He rummaged through it, pulling out a few items and setting them on a nearby table. Zira joined him, looking over the parts with growing hope. As Jace worked, Zira noticed something in the distance, a shadow moving across the horizon. Her heart skipped a beat. She could feel it in her bones. The invaders were near. She grabbed Jace's arm, pulling him to the back of the building. "We have to hide, now." Jace's eyes widened as he saw the shadow moving closer. "What is it?" "They here?" Zira nodded. "They're coming. They're closer than we thought." Jace looked around, his mind racing. "We don't have time to fix the ship. We need to get out of here." Zira felt a rush of panic. She had to stay calm. If she didn't, they would both be in danger. She looked at the small shed nearby, then back at the outpost. There was nowhere to hide in the open. But the shed might have something they could use. "We'll have to make a stand," she said, her voice tight but determined. "Slow them down. You get to the shed." Jace shook his head, his eyes locked on hers. "No, I'm not leaving." "You." Zira felt a pang in her chest, but she didn't have time to think about it. "You don't have a choice. If they catch us both, it's over." "Gosh!" Opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, Zira pushed him toward the shed. "Go," she ordered. "I'll be right behind you." She watched as Jace ran toward the shed, her heart pounding. She could hear the invaders' voices in the distance. The time to hide was running out. Zira grabbed a nearby tool and stood at the entrance of the building, ready to face whatever came next. Her body still felt weak, but the fire inside her burned bright. She wouldn't let them take her without a fight. The tension in the air was thick as Zira watched Jace disappear into the shed. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She had to buy them time. The invaders were closing in, and if they caught them now, it would be the end. She gripped the tool tightly in her hand, her fingers trembling, not from fear, but from the urgency of the situation. The sound of boots crunching on gravel echoed in the distance. Yura could see them now, dark figures moving across the plain. She couldn't make out how many there were, but the low hum of their energy shields told her everything she needed to know. They were armed and ready to hunt her down. The invaders weren't here just to capture hers. They were here to finish what they had started. She looked toward the shed, praying that Jace was making preparations, that he was gathering the tools they needed. They couldn't leave without fixing the ship, but right now, survival was the top priority. Zira quickly moved to the back of the building, hiding behind the large crates stacked high against the walls. She knew she couldn't outrun them, but she might be able to outsmart them. She had to stay calm. She focused on her breathing, steadying her mind, listening carefully to the sounds outside. Her ears perked up at every movement. The invaders weren't far off now, and Zira's heart raced faster. She peered around the corner and saw the lead invader, a tall figure in dark armor. His face was hidden behind a visor, but the way he moved told her everything she needed to know. He was dangerous. They all were. She needed to act fast. Zira grabbed a small rock from the ground and threw it into the distance, hoping to distract them. The noise of the rock hitting the ground drew the invaders' attention. The figure in the lead paused, his head turning in the direction of the sound. The distraction worked, but only for a moment. "Search the area," the leader ordered. In a harsh, gravelly voice, Zira's stomach twisted. The invaders had split up, now searching the area for any sign of life. She didn't have much time. She had to move now. She quietly sprinted to the shed, using the shadows to stay hidden. The door was cracked open, just enough for her to slip inside unnoticed. She didn't dare make a sound as she moved through the small, dark space. Her eyes adjusted quickly to the dim light, and she saw Jace working on the ship's engine, his hands moving quickly as he tried to piece it back together. Jace, Zero whispered urgently, her voice barely audible. Jace turned around, his face pale with worry. Zira, he breathed. I thought I heard something. What's going on out there? They're here, she said, her voice shaking slightly. They're searching the area. We don't have much time. Jace nodded, his face hardening with determination. We need to finish the repairs. If we can get the engine running, we can get out of here before they find us. Zira's eyes flicked to the parts scattered across the floor. She could see. The engine was almost ready. The pieces were in place, but they needed one final part to get it running. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Do you have the last piece? Jace hesitated, then nodded. I think so, but it's in the storage crate outside. I'll grab it. Don't go outside, Zira warned. They're out there. It's too dangerous. Jace looked at her, torn. We need that part if we're going to make it. Zira gripped his arm, stopping him. I'll go. You stay here and finish the repairs. If I don't make it back, you need to leave. Don't wait for me. Eyes softened, but he knew she was right. Okay, he said quietly. Be careful. Zira nodded and slipped out of the shed, staying low to the ground. She moved as quietly as possible, keeping her eyes on the invaders as they patrolled the area. The leader was still in sight, and he was getting closer. Zira's heart pounded in her chest. She had to be fast. She reached the storage crate and opened it slowly, keeping her ears alert for any sounds. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal of the part they needed. As she pulled it out, she heard footsteps approaching. Panic surged through her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She crouched behind the crate, holding her breath, praying they wouldn't see her. The invader passed by, oblivious to her presence. Zira waited a few more moments before standing up and moving quickly back toward the shed. The part was in her hands, and she had made it back without being caught. Her legs were shaking, but she didn't stop. She couldn't, as she slipped back inside the shed. She handed the part to Jace. His eyes lit up with relief, and he immediately got to work, securing it into place. Zira didn't dare relax just yet. The invaders were still out there, and they were getting closer. How much longer? She whispered. JSC worked quickly, his brow furrowed in concentration. A few more minutes. I think it's almost done. Zira kept watch, her senses sharp. She could hear the invaders' voices now, louder than before. They were getting closer. Searching the area methodically, her pulse quickened. She could see the leader just a few meters away, moving closer to the shed. Jace, hurry. Finally, Jace turned the key, and the engine hummed to life. Zira's heart skipped. A beat. It worked. The ship was ready. But they still needed to get to it. Let's go, Jace said, his voice steady. We can't wait any longer. Zira gave him a quick nod, and together they ran to the ship, moving as quickly and quietly as they could.
Ow.
The sound of footsteps. Behind them grew louder, but they were already inside the ship. Jace hit the controls, and the engines roared to life. As the ship lifted off the ground, Zira looked out the window. The invaders were still on the ground below, their figures small and distant. She let out a sigh of relief. They had escaped at least for now, but Zira knew this was only the beginning. The invaders would keep coming. They would keep hunting her. And now Jace was in danger too. It couldn't stop now. They had to keep moving, keep fighting. Galaxy was vast, and she wouldn't stop until she found safety. The ship soared higher into the sky, leaving the barren planet far behind. Zira felt a wave of relief wash over her as the land below became nothing more than a distant blur. She glanced at Jace, who was focused on the controls, his face a mixture of exhaustion and determination. They had made it out of the outpost, but their journey was far from over. They won't stop looking for us, Zira said softly, her voice full of worry. I can't believe we got out of there so easily. Jace didn't look away from the controls, but his lips pressed together in a tight line. It's not over. We're not safe yet. Zira nodded, her heart heavy with the same realization. The invaders were relentless. They had been hunting her since the attack, and there was no reason to believe they would stop. They had too many resources, too much power. Zira wasn't about to give up. She wasn't about to let them win. The ship moved steadily through the stars. the hum of the engines soothing in the silence. Zira settled back into her seat, trying to relax, but her thoughts kept returning to the dangers that still lay ahead. What would they do when they reached a safe place? Where could they go? She glanced over at Jace again, her gaze lingering. He'd saved her life. He had helped her escape. But what did he want in return? What would happen once the danger was over, Jace? She began, her voice uncertain. What happens after we're safe? After the invaders are gone? Jace didn't answer immediately, his fingers flying over the controls. He was quiet for a long moment before finally speaking. I don't know, I just want to make sure you're safe. I've never been in a situation like this before. Zira frowned slightly. I never thought I'd be in this situation either. Jace turned his head to look at her, his eyes searching. You don't have to explain. I get it. You're not alone anymore. Zira felt a lump form in her throat at his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that things could be different. But the reality of her situation kept pulling her back. She wasn't like him. She wasn't human. She was a survivor, and she didn't know if she could ever truly trust someone again. The calm didn't last long. Suddenly, the ship shuddered, and Zira's heart skipped a beat. The alarms blared, and Jace's hands flew across the console, his face turning pale. They found us, he muttered, his voice strained. They're attacking. Zira's pulse raced as she watched the red warning lights flash on the control panel. How many? She asked, her voice sharp with fear. Jace's eyes narrowed as he tried to assess the situation. Too many. Got ships following us. Zira's stomach twisted. She had known this day would come, but she hadn't expected it to be so soon. The invaders had been tracking them, and now they were closing in. There was nowhere to hide. No place to run. They'll never stop coming for me, Zira said, her voice trembling with frustration. We're not giving up, Jace said firmly, his eyes locking with hers. We'll fight back. Before Zira could respond, a loud explosion rocked the ship. The entire vessel lurched, throwing them both forward in their seats. The alarms grew louder, and Zira gripped the edge of her seat, her heart pounding in her chest. We need to do something, Zira said urgently. They're getting too close. Jace didn't waste any time. Yelled. His hands moved quickly over the controls, steering the ship to avoid another attack. He punched in a series of commands, and the ship suddenly veered to the side, narrowly dodging another blast. But the invaders were relentless. They kept firing, trying to bring the ship down. We need to fight back, Jace said, his voice tight with determination. Can you use the weapon systems? Zira nodded, even though she didn't fully understand how they worked. She had been trained in battle, but using a ship's weapons was different. Still, she couldn't just sit there, not when they were. Under attack, I'll try, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. Jace guided the ship into a more aggressive maneuver, spinning it around to face the oncoming enemy ships. The invaders were relentless, firing blast after blast at them. Zira focused, her hands gripping the weapon's controls, and fired back. The first shot was off, but the second hit its target. One of the invader ships exploded in a flash of light. Nice shot, Jace said, a brief smile flickering on his face. Zira didn't have time to respond. The invaders were regrouping, and they were coming in stronger now. They had to move quickly if they wanted to survive. We can't outrun them, Zira said, her voice low and tense. We need to make a stand. We need to take them out. Nodded, his jaw clenched with resolve. I'm with you. Let's finish this. Zira fired again, hitting one of the ships dead on. It went down in a fiery explosion, but there were still more to deal with. The invaders kept coming, undeterred. Zira could see their ships moving into position, ready to strike again. Getting surrounded, Jace said, his voice grim. We need to break through their lines. Zira's mind raced. She had to think fast. They were running out of options. But then she remembered something, the small ship's cloaking device. She hadn't used it yet, but it might be their only chance. Turn off all the non-essential systems, Zira said quickly. We'll use the cloaking device to escape. Jace looked at her, surprised. You think it'll work? It has. 2, she said, will disappear from their radar. If we can make it through their blockade, we might have a chance. Jace nodded, switching off the non-essential systems as Zero activated the cloaking device. The ship's exterior shimmered, blending into the background of space. For a moment, it was completely silent. They were invisible to the invaders. Zero let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. It worked. They were safe for now. But she knew it wasn't over. Invaders would find them again. When they did, Zero would be ready. She had survived this far, and she wasn't going to stop now. The ship sailed through space, cloaked in silence, as it drifted away from the invader fleet. Zero's breath came in slow, steady waves, her eyes focused on the distant stars. The tension that had gripped her chest for so long was still there, but now it was mixed with a strange sense of calm. For the first time in days, they had managed to escape the enemy. But Zero knew better than to think they were safe. Jace sat beside her, his hands still gripping the controls, though his posture had relaxed. "We got away," he said quietly, as if trying to convince himself more than her. Zero didn't answer right away. She was staring out of the window, her thoughts racing. "It's only temporary," she finally said, her voice calm but firm. "They'll find us again. And next time we won't be so lucky." Jace let out a deep sigh, his shoulders slumping. He understood the truth in her words. The invaders were relentless. They wouldn't stop until they had her. And as much as he wanted to deny it, the reality was clear. They were fighting a battle they couldn't win alone. "We need a plan," Zero said, breaking the silence. "We need to get to a place where we can rest and regroup. Somewhere they can't track us." Jace nodded, his fingers tapping against the ship's console. "There's an old mining station not far from here. It's abandoned, but it's off the grid. We could hide there for a while and figure out what to do next." Zero's eyes flicked to him, and after that, "Get you to safety," he said, the determination in his voice ringing clear. "I won't stop until I know you're safe." Zero felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. She had been alone for so long, always fighting, always running. But Jace was different. He was risking everything to help her. She didn't know if she could ever trust anyone again, but with him, it felt like there was a chance. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it deep inside. "Let's go," she said quietly, her voice steady. "Lead the way." Jace turned the ship in the direction of the mining station, and they sped off into the vast expanse of space. Journey was quiet, but Zero couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. The stars outside seemed to mock her, beautiful and serene, while her life was anything but. She wasn't just running from the invaders, she was running from everything she had known. She was running from her past, from the life that had been destroyed. They arrived at the mining station just as the sun dipped below the horizon of a nearby moon. It was a dark, forgotten place, its metal structures covered in rust and dust. The station had been abandoned for years, its purpose long since forgotten. But it was exactly what they needed. Jack landed the ship on a small platform near the entrance. "This will do," he said, his eyes scanning the area. "We'll be hidden here for a while." Zero nodded, though she couldn't quite shake the sense of unease that crept over her. They had to stay alert. This place might be forgotten by most, but not by the invaders. They would be looking for any sign of movement, any trail to follow. She wasn't sure how much longer they had before the invaders found them again. "I'll get the supplies," Jace said, standing up from his seat. "You stay here, rest." Zero didn't argue. She needed to rest badly. Her body still felt sore from the crash, and the days of running and fighting had taken their toll, but her mind wouldn't let her rest completely. She couldn't afford to be complacent. Not when her enemies were still out there. As Jace left the ship, Zero stood by the window, keeping watch. She could see the wreckage of the mining station through the dusty glass. It looked empty, abandoned, but she knew better than to trust appearances. She had learned that the hard way. Minutes turned into hours, and the silence grew thicker with each passing moment. Zero could hear the wind outside howling through the broken metal of the station, but there was no sound of pursuit. For now they were safe, but Zero knew this wouldn't last forever. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to breathe. She was so tired. Tired of running, tired of fighting. She had spent her whole life surviving, but she wondered how much longer she could keep it up. She had nothing left. No home, no family, no people to return to. The galaxy had become a cold, lonely place. She didn't even know why the invaders had attacked. What did they want with her? What did they want important? She was just one survivor in a galaxy full of them. But Zero couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There was something bigger at play, something she didn't understand. The invaders were part of it. The door to the ship opened with a low hiss, and Jace stepped back inside, carrying a bag filled with supplies. "We've got food, water, and medical supplies," he said, setting the bag down on the table. "We should be good for a few days." Zero didn't answer at first. She was lost in thought, her mind racing. But then she looked up at Jace, meeting his gaze. "What happens when they find us again?" Jace didn't flinch. "We fight. We keep running. We keep surviving." Zero felt a spark of something deep inside her. Hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. Maybe, just maybe, they could fight back. Maybe they could win. "I won't stop," she said quietly, her voice filled with determination. "I won't stop until I'm free." Jace nodded. "Neither will I." They both stood there for a long moment, silent, but in that silence, they shared something. A bond, a promise. They weren't alone anymore. They had each other, and that made all the difference.